Today on Biblical Higher Ed Talk, I sit down with Jeff Spear, founder of CFO Colleague, to discuss the fiscal health of higher education. With news of college closures happening almost weekly, what's the future of higher education in North America? Thank you for tuning in today. I'm your host, Philip Dearborn, president of ABHE. And this is going to be a good episode for us, perhaps a little bit of a tough episode where we talk about some sensitive things, specifically finances. I don't know what it is about when we talk about money. There tends to be kind of a nervousness, but we all know in higher education and biblical higher education, budgets are tight. Funding is scarce, and with student loans and student grants and Pell and all of those things are significant issues that we have to deal with. And it feels like almost every week we have another school that's announcing closure because of financial reasons. So I thought it would be good to bring in somebody who I respect and believe has a pretty good pulse on where things are at financially with higher education in general, but more than specifically within biblical higher education. And that person is Jeff Spear. Jeff is the founder of CFO Colleague. One of the things I love about CFO Colleague is your monthly newsletter that you put out. It is so informative with all kinds of good data, good advice for our schools. So I really appreciate you doing that. Jeff has 25 years of experience having served as a CFO at 3 different colleges before he started CFO Colleague as the founder and president. So I've invited Jeff in to have a hard conversation about the financial picture of biblical higher education. So Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Phil. It really is a privilege to be with you today, and certainly we have a heart for what ABHE is doing, and so this is a wonderful opportunity to have just a short chat together.
Absolutely. And you've been longtime partners with ABHE. You show up at the annual meeting and you're part of a lot of our leadership development events. So we definitely appreciate your engagement through the years. So we're going to get into these hard questions here in a moment. Just so our audience can get to know you a little bit more. Talk to us about a defining moment that God used in your life that shaped you and put you onto the trajectory of working and starting CFO Colleague.
A number of years ago, I recognized as a CFO of one of the wonderful schools that I worked with that I was not able to report to people the way I should. Essentially, I realized that I needed to be on my own. And this was a God moment for me that it was time to go out and do something new. And it was really risky because this was not a concept that anybody was doing. They had consultants for enrollment, advancement, strategic planning, coaching of presidents, capital campaigns, everything you could imagine. But finance, we CFOs felt like we were pretty well together. And so we didn't really need a lot of help. So we felt the move to do that. And then in the first year, it was incredibly successful. I made $15,000, but we kept going, and it's been a wonderful experience. And we've had the opportunity to work with over 200 schools now. And sometimes, even when you're 55 years old, you have to listen and say, maybe it's time to do something new. And I'm grateful that we did.
Yeah. So the schools that you've worked with, are they all within either CCCU or ABHE, or have you done some outside of the Christian college context?
Well, we have had some outside of the Christian college context. And honestly, it's been helpful to understand what other people are doing and apply that to our constituency. But by and large, most of our schools would be considered faith-based and would be part of CCCU or ABHE. Many of our consultants came out of those particular institutions as well, because those are people that I knew, and I wanted to make sure that we surround ourselves with people that I felt comfortable with, who I had known over the years and would feel confident that they could provide good service. We've even gotten into some publics lately. We didn't even try, but they contacted us. So a few publics have worked with us as well.
That's terrific. And also knowing we have the broader scope of all of higher education, and there are definitely different sectors, and biblical Christian higher education is definitely unique. There are unique elements that the publics or secular privates don't necessarily deal with, but you have a big bench of folks who get it, understand our missions and our institutions. So appreciate you working with them. All right, let's jump into it. As I said at the top of the show, it feels like every week we've got another school closing, not necessarily a Christian or Bible college, though we do have those, but in all of higher education across North America, we're hearing of institutions on a regular basis who are closing the doors. You dig a little bit deeper, and honestly, I can't think of one recently that's closed not for financial reasons. I think it's right. Always at the top of the list. There may be other reasons why. Your take on what's happening. You've been in the industry now for several decades. What's happening?
Well, I think that there are a number of factors that have come into play, and certainly the COVID experience didn't help us a lot. Mm-hmm. Yes, we were bestowed in some cases with lots of cash, which was a wonderful thing. But unfortunately, there were some schools that look at their budget as one big bucket of what the money is, and then their spending over there is completely separate. So they didn't match the time frames of their revenues. You get a COVID gift in, it's not a reason to hire another major gifts officer.
Yeah.
But we did that. And we added people in other areas, administrative areas. And unfortunately, that may have accelerated things somewhat. But the reality is there seems to be a softening of demand for the traditional higher education experience. That's just what we're seeing out there. There are many reasons for that. One of them is demographic. There are fewer high school graduates in certain areas of the country. For higher education, biblical higher education in particular, the church in certain regions is doing better than others. And when we draw primarily from smaller churches, which is really what biblical higher education has done since it started, then we have to look at the health of that small church to determine whether we have a wonderful supply of potential students. Mm-hmm. So that's happening, but it's the lack of adjustment to reality. We keep on thinking we're going to turn it around. We're going to get more students in. We're going to get that big transformational gift. All those different things are used as words to support what is a declining operation. So we don't match our spending with the declining revenues. Financial reasons for closure are an effect and not a cause. Because what drove us to the point of not having cash, not making a bond payment, or not even being able to make payroll is likely to be a number of other operational factors that we just said, well, we can't fix them. We're just going to keep on rolling as we have and hope for a different outcome. So I think it's been coming for some time. Mm-hmm. I think COVID delayed it a little bit. But I think, unfortunately, COVID may have also accelerated it on the other side of it based upon the way we used those dollars as they flowed in.
Yeah. I remember an article, this is probably maybe 10 years ago. I think it was a Inside Higher Ed or Chronicle of Higher Ed article looking forward and saying, in 10 years, we're going to have colleges closing with full classrooms. And the focus of the article was on concern over the discount rates, that they're bringing in students, but they are so discounting themselves to the point of beyond what it, costs to educate a student. Talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing with discount rates.
Yeah, that's a concern. In fact, we like to look at whatever net tuition revenue is being generated. So, if you've got a $50,000 tuition rate and you're charging an 80% discount, you're at $10,000. That's better than the person who's at $13,000 and taking off 50%, if you know what I'm saying. So essentially, we look at net tuition rates, and we have not seen, particularly in this strata, in biblical higher education, we have seen a reticence to raise the cost of education. Mm-hmm. We seem to think that the problem is all cost. Well, it may be for the larger schools that are charging ridiculous amounts of money, but for smaller institutions, we're not charging enough. And so that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is when we expand non-academic offerings to try and get students in the door. So we add a sport, and it may seem like a great idea. We bring in some wonderful people for that sport, but we now are discounting those people, and we have a programmatic cost associated with that. When athletics are around 20% of your institution, that's fine, 20% of your students. But we've seen schools at 60 and 70%, and we recognize they don't have enough net tuition revenue that they're charging already. And we have the added cost of all these programs they're running. We've meandered in some ways from our core mission to try and bring in additional bodies. We've been listening to the voices that are saying, well, you do this and you're going to get more students and you'll be better off. Yeah. But the reality is we just don't charge enough for what we offer, or we're not receiving the kind of donations to provide subsidy for that. And I think that's probably the most significant challenge that schools are dealing with. You know, I had an article just a week or two ago about how much you can afford to pay your faculty. If you have a reasonable student to faculty ratio of, 15 to 17, you can afford to pay your faculty about 4 times on average what a student pays. So if a student's paying $10,000, congratulations, you can afford on average to pay your faculty about $40,000. So there is a relationship there. And if we're not charging enough, or our classes are too small, the result is that we get ourselves upside down.
Yeah. And I love how you frame it, that if a school is closing for financial reasons, there's something else at play. And a lot of times I think it revolves around value and quality. If you are charging less and you have a great product, you can charge more for a great product. You're making a strong statement for a value proposition that you're going to spend this and you're going to get this out of that experience. Problem comes when you can't deliver, or you really can't live up to the promise that you've made through that value proposition. That's not a financial issue. That's a much deeper problem within the institution, that you can't deliver on the promise that you've made to your students and your parents.
Well, yeah. And in fact, in some cases, a school has trouble articulating what their real promise is.
Yeah.
And you really want to be able to share that with people when you graduate from here. It's like when you take one of those courses online. When you finish this course, you will know this, 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 and this. Yeah. When you graduate from this institution, we will have prepared you to be this, to be that. And here's what these people do when they graduate. And here are some testimonials. We really need to, when the Bible says, go out in the highways and byways and compel them to come in, we have to give them a reason for becoming a part of our institution and be able to understand that. And everybody should be able to articulate that particular promise and give evidence to how we are actually accomplishing it. So that's a pretty big ask.
To me, this is probably at the core of it. And I often frame it from the perspective of colleges talk in terms of their distinctives when they ought to be talking about their value proposition. Yeah, and how many ads do you see for colleges? It's like perpetual fall, where it's the stereotypical, hey, we have a beautiful campus and we have an athletic program and we have a small faculty to student ratio and great chapel services and a great dorm experience, and our dining hall is awesome, and we have great things that happen on weekends. That's every CCCU and ABHE college can make that same claim. Those are distinct. So we're describing the distinctives of our sector, not necessarily our institutions.
That's true.
And then it becomes a race to the bottom, because the market is saying, okay, well, if you're all kind of the same, then I'm going to go to college A and here's my financial aid package. Then I'm going to go to college B and say, hey, look what A did. Can you match this? Yeah. And then I'm going to go to C, where I'm going to go back to A and say, hey, can you trim a little bit more off? That's a race to the bottom. But if we're talking in terms of value, like what do I get out of the money that I'm spending? that does then become unique per institution. And then you start to build that proposition to say, and it's going to cost more, but because it's costing more, this is what else you're getting out of it if you attend at this institution.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very true. We need to make sure that we are taking care of the institution and engaging in future-oriented investment or spending. Yeah. So in other words, if our budget cuts involve cutting back on addressing deferred maintenance, or we don't spend enough on marketing, so we are not really telling people what we're about, or we're not doing new program development for the institution because we just don't seem to have the money. It seems too often when we engage in budget cuts, we first look at those things that impact the future. And when we do that, unfortunately, we then present to our prospective student an institution that just maybe doesn't look as good as the other one down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the questions that we had put out here, and we're kind of touching on it right now, college called the sticker shock. An institution this past summer advertised or put out their rates that some of their programs would be at $98,000 or $400,000 for a 4-year college degree. That's a lot of people's mortgages. How did we get here? Are we outpacing value? You kind of said that the college proposition to go off for 4 years is kind of soft. It's not as strong as it once was.
Right. Well, that particular school would be considered somewhat selective. Mm-hmm. And so getting in there is not something where, we check to see if your breath will fog a mirror. It has to involve some significant accomplishments, achievements, and aptitude that will allow you access. And if you are accepted, then congratulations, you have the privilege of paying $400,000 for a 4-year experience. And there are families that can afford that. But what's fascinating, and those aren't a lot of the families that are in biblical higher education, frankly, because our families have not focused on money. Yeah. We're not going to have a lot of wealthy people that are sending their students to colleges. But it's interesting to me that in some cases, a student will apply to a bunch of different institutions and will be willing to pay full price at the one that's really prestigious to get into, but wants you to pay them to come to your institution because of the difference in value. Yeah. So it is that differential in value from the standpoint of the consumer, really, the student, that has led to an escalation of prices in certain areas for some people, and the sense that we have to limit our price increases for those that are, of course, the more needy institutions. I think that has driven some of the price differentials that we have seen. We've also seen a lot more regulation that's come in from the federal government. So we have to have Title IX officers now. We have to have much more robust financial aid people to handle what is a very complex environment. We have institutional research that we have to make sure we have going on because our accreditors are expecting that kind of data to be available to identify the quality of our instruction. And students are wanting these experiences. I mean, lazy rivers and climbing walls and all kinds of opportunities in beautiful facilities, dining halls that look better than most restaurants that I attend. We have asked for all this stuff and tried to provide it to people because, frankly, in society today, there's a much higher level of expectation than when I went to school, which was I packed things up in my 63 Falcon. My parents said, so long, and I drove 2 hours to a Christian college, Houghton College in Western New York.
Yep.
And I think I saw my folks after the 8th week. So, I mean, different world completely today. And I think that's driven some of the costs and expectations.
Yeah, that's well said. And unfortunately, the public, and this is documented through data, that the public has basically lost confidence in the sector of higher education. And they look at the headlines, the one that I mentioned, of $400,000, without fully understanding that's one institution, a select institution, but they have a perception that defines all of higher education. And I think the government, federal government at least, is reacting. And that's where you're seeing the CCRA, College Reduction Act, being proposed, which basically puts more responsibility on the institutions to be involved in paying back, especially if they're enrolling in programs that they're not going to get salaries. And so you get this meddling because it's a response to a perceived college costs too much. There's also a movement out there that I don't know if you've heard of, but it's basically tear the paper ceiling or rip the paper ceiling, basically saying, you don't even need to go to college. And there are major companies that are backing this, that have come together and said, I mean, we're talking like IBM and Apple, and like, you don't need to go, Microsoft, you don't need to go to college. There are different ways that you can approach the education process in order to get good paying jobs. And that's where I kind of push back for our sector. We're not about you getting good paying jobs. That's not our goal. Our goal is much bigger. There's a kingdom goal that's at play here, but we get lumped in with the rest. So our sector well. You've worked with them. So be honest. Share with us what concerns you the most within biblical higher education.
Well, I think we have to make sure that we are pivoting with the expectations of those who are going to be our students. That is, how much of our education is going to be in concert with the local church? How much are we doing to allow people who are preparing for ministry, who perhaps are older in life, to easily do that while continuing to work? In the old days, you packed up your station wagon after you got saved and you drove off to Bible college. And that was what you did. That was evidence that you really were called to this ministry. And then you struggled and did whatever you possibly could to get through school with a bunch of people that were much younger than you. And then you got out and became a preacher somewhere. Those days, I think, have passed. So we need to make sure that we are relevant in what we are providing to those who need education. But by the same token, I don't think a strictly online relationship is going to be enough to prepare people to be church leaders. We need to have that fellowship. Christianity is all about relationship. We believe in a vertical relationship with God. We believe in a horizontal relationship with others. And if we don't have that in a world that's really in trouble with a lot of people with needs that are off the scale, we're going to not do so well. So we have to sell a compelling vision for Christian biblical higher education to those who have a sense of calling for ministry, so that we can, as one person paraphrased the Great Commission, go ye into all the world and relate to people exactly where they're at. And I think there's something to be said for that. We believe in missions. We believe in going out to people and then understanding their culture and trying to make sure that we don't offend their culture, of course, but bringing them the hope of the gospel. Well, couldn't we do the same thing with what we offer educationally? It means less bricks and mortar, less reliance upon that. And it means more technology and more relationships and more partnering with that local church that's out there that needs to have leadership for the next few years. And they're wondering how to pull this off without people showing up with mounds of debt. So that's my sense, Phil. Maybe that's gone a little bit too far over the edge.
No, I like it because it our way of doing it, and I've seen it a lot of times where institutions our tendency, because we're Christ followers and we believe in the Word of God and we have a theology around everything that we do, there's a tendency to theologize methodology, which I'm not totally opposed to, but not to the point that it is resistance to change, where we just say, no, we got to do it this way. And we've attached the Bible verses along with it as to why we do it. I think our industry just needs significant disruption. The old way of doing it is simply not where today's generation is, where the public is. And our mission remains the same, which is what I love about it. And I love your advice to connect to the church. The church is the plan, is God's plan for this age. So how are we coming alongside serving the church, helping them in fulfilling their mission? That's what our role is. It's not about us. It's not about our institutions. To pull that off is significantly challenging our old way of doing things. But I think it's time. I think we need to do that.
I agree. That's it. Just we don't have an option, frankly.
Yeah.
Because the alternative is that a larger organization will eventually take this real estate that we're talking about here and just exploit it significantly. And all these smaller biblical institutions will be just scrambling to get people to show up at their door for a residential experience. I think that's still going to be important. That's the premium experience. Yep. And in particular for that 18 to 22-year-old, I think being in intentional community is still very valuable. And we never want to discount that.
Yep.
But for the so many who find themselves called to ministry when they're 25 or 35 or 50, we have to make sure that we're providing that opportunity in appropriate context.
Yeah. If we have somebody who's listening, a president or a CFO or a leader on their campus, as I'm action oriented, it's like, okay, so you've defined the problem. What would you say are 3 very practical steps, first steps that they can take where they kind of are reading the financial statements? They just have a sense that we just can't keep going on this way. Give us 3 practical steps that they can take.
Right. Well, on our website, we've got 30 benchmarks for the resource constrained, and that's pretty much who we work with. So number 1, I would say try to connect your spending with your revenues. And that's what we've tried to do with these benchmarks. So number 1, recalibrate. We say 70% of your net tuition revenue should be spent in salaries and benefits. Now, if you have a school with huge donations coming in every year, that probably doesn't apply. But we really need to make sure that we are connecting revenues and with expenses so we don't get out of line and wind up not doing the things that we had talked about schools that are not doing. So that's number 1. Number 2, though, and this is probably should be number 1, and that is understand your mission, focus on your mission, communicate that mission, and make sure that mission is understood by your constituency. Live it. We don't see very many schools, I don't know of any, who say our mission is to have the largest percentage of athletes of any institution in America. And yet there are those who that's really what they're doing. So their practical mission does not align with their formally stated mission. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is to make sure you take care of your people. We have, balanced budgets on the back of our people for a very long time. Often it's because we have too many people. So in some cases, to take care of your people, you need to have fewer. But make sure you take care of people because the options and opportunities for people in a world where housing's expensive and groceries are expensive and everything's going up like crazy, they're taking the advantage to get other jobs that pay substantially more and might have less responsibility associated with them. So make sure that you're taking care of your people.
Great words of advice. And we're down to our last minute. This has been a phenomenal conversation. So in the last minute, you've got the crystal ball. Where's this all going? As you look at the landscape of higher education, biblical higher education, what does it all look like in 10 to 15 years?
We cannot underestimate the impact of technology on this industry. There are people out there right now who are at the cutting edge of this stuff. I think of the people at campus.edu who are partners with ABHE as well. And they are creating high content coursework for people that doesn't require you to be actually in the classroom. So that's one piece. Collaboration is the other. That's a free lunch. If I'm teaching a wonderful course in biblical archaeology, maybe I can share that with some other schools synchronously. The same time we're dialing in and we're part of that. Why can't we share with each other since we serve the same Lord? I think third, there's going to always be a focus on accountability. In fact, that's going to increase over the next number of years. And we have to deliver on our promises so that we don't wind up, being criticized in the press.
There's an ethic there. There's an absolute ethic, especially because we are Christ followers, that we have that responsibility to do. So, Jeff, this has been wonderful. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experiences with us today.
It's been my pleasure. I so appreciate each one in your organization, and let's keep going.
Absolutely. And if you want to learn a little bit more about CFO Colleague, I encourage you to look at the show description, and there you'll see a link to some of the things that Jeff referenced. And just be encouraged. These are difficult days. Our mission is God's mission. And if you're looking at your institution and you feel like something's got to change, I encourage you to start taking steps to figure out how to define a preferred future that aligns better with what God's mission is. So until next time, stay kingdom focused.